I'd like to introduce you to my dad, Austin Goodrich. My dad enlisted in the army when he was just 17 years old. He served in Germany in World War II and then afterwards attended the University of Michigan. Upon graduating, he walked right up to a newly built Central Intelligence Agency and asked for a job. He went on to serve for nearly 30 years as an undercover CIA officer. His cover was as a reporter, so he got to interview fascinating people and travel the world. My dad knew about five and a half languages and wrote several books. Then, at the age of 65, he married my mom and they welcomed me into this world. To many, my dad was a man of accomplishments. They saw him as someone who served his country, traveled the world. But to me, he was my dad. My dad introduced me to many lifelong loves, like baseball. He was always trying to teach me meaningful lessons. So with baseball, it was how to be a supportive team player or how to never ever lose hope, even as a Cubs fan in the 90s. I thought that would land here. He was always there cheering me on in the bleachers. And to my teammates, they teased me about his age and they thought that he was my grandpa. But to me, he was my dad. In high school and college, my interest shifted from music or baseball to music and theater. And just as my dad attended all of my ball games, he went on to attend all of my performances. When I was a senior in high school, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He became more forgetful and repetitive at dinner and would ask the same questions like, "What show are you in again? How does that song go?" But regardless of him knowing what show I was in or what role I was playing, he was still there, beaming with pride and even giving me standing ovations. And this is high school theater we're talking about. At this point, people were getting a little bit more frustrated with his repetitiveness. They would laugh awkwardly at him repeating things, and they started to see him as getting old and forgetful. But to me, he was my dad. My dad's journey in many ways started when he enlisted in the army at 17. And I think that his diagnosis, in a way, started me on my own world journey at that same age. As years progressed, so did his disease. I was really struggling with the weight of the word Alzheimer's. I was seeing it only depicted as loss, being told the narrative that I had already lost my dad, even though he was sitting right in front of me. More than anything, I remember being terrified that one day he would forget my name. Luckily, I went off to college to study musical theater and was able to shift my perception of dementia in a really positive way. My professor, Ann Basting, introduced me to these concepts that showed me what I was learning in my acting classes was directly applicable to the care I could provide my father. In acting, we learn a lot about the present moment, and I come to find out that's exactly where I could meet my father and rebuild our relationship. We also learn a lot about improvisation and the concept of yes and. And those concepts were excellent when it came to communicating with him and being flexible and adaptable. As time went on and his disease progressed, I leaned into the ideas of time slips. Time Slips is a nonprofit organization that supports these ideas. It's also my professor Ann Basting's organization. In time slips, we use the idea of beautiful questions. Now, beautiful questions are open ended questions that are based in the present moment, and they have no right or wrong answers. It's really transformative when you use it with people with dementia. Instead of us getting in these loops where I'd be frustrated and feeling like I kept getting in that same pattern with him by asking questions like, "Do you remember when we went to the beach last year?" I would open up our conversations by asking a beautiful question like, "If you could fly anywhere in the world, where would you want to go?" This broke through those traditional loops, and we were able to explore more conversations that led to his love of travel and the importance of exploring the world. I also learned a lot from him just by being present and open. We would go on walks with our two family dogs, and he'd continue to comment on the beauty of the clouds. I'm talking 10, 12 times commenting on the same clouds that were above us. I thought it was a little frustrating at first, but I realized that the pressures of tomorrow were released from him, and he was able to prioritize the beauty that was right there in front of him. By now, people saw my dad as someone with Alzheimer's, but I kept learning from him. And to me, he was my dad, and he was still really good at it. Shortly before I graduated college, my father passed away. And in the last week of his life, he declined very quickly. That fateful moment finally came where he didn't remember my name. But you know something? It wasn't all that bad after all. With the work that I had done to shift my idea of who we are without our memories, I was able to be there with him present in that moment. And in that moment, we were two people who loved one another and cared for each other. I know that he forgot my name, but I felt that he knew my heart. I thought that Alzheimer's would strip my dad of everything that he was to me. But in fact, it was a time that we were able to rebuild and transform our relationship and even watched it grow. Yes, there were difficult days and it was challenging. However, I can confidently say that my dad lived well with dementia, something that you don't often hear. Now, I contribute that mostly to the exceptional care that my mother provided him. I know not everyone is so lucky. My mom made sure that his life maintained purpose and dignity, from attending community art classes to continuing with his writing or doing the crossword puzzles every day and helping with the dishes. And yes, the crossword puzzles were more and more wrong as time went on. And sure, the dishes had to be rewashed from time to time, but it meant a lot to him. I can say that watching my mom care for my dad was the ultimate gift of love. And this gift, I believe, is what contributed to his well being in the years post diagnosis. I then went on after graduating to start a theater company called Stage Right. In Stage Right, we'd go into care communities and use these creative engagement techniques to devise, rehearse, and put on original musicals. The seniors were a part of every step of those musicals. There's one workshop in particular that stays with me. We were working on some songwriting, and a woman in her care aide entered a few minutes after we had begun. I welcomed them, of course, and I wanted to get them engaged right away, so I asked them a beautiful question. But the care aide interjected and said, "No, no, 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 she can't speak. She can't participate. We're just here to watch." I looked at the woman who became sort of deflated from this comment, of course, but I moved on with the workshop for the sake of the group, and we finished the song. Then, when it was time to come up with the movements for the song, I asked her directly a question, and that was, "How would you take this phrase that we've come up with and show me with your body what that looks like? What does that lyric look like to you?" And in return, she gave me the most beautiful movement that we, of course, immediately put right into the show. I said, "Well, it looks like we found our choreographer." Her energy completely shifted. She smiled. She became completely engaged. And it's because she was being celebrated for the abilities she did have, not being discredited for the ones that she did not have any longer. People saw her as someone who couldn't speak, but to me, she was a choreographer who had a lot to say. I then, in my mid to late 20s, moved to Chicago and became a professional caregiver. And in this time, I worked with a woman named Barbara, a nice Irish woman named Barbara. She never remembered my name, so I said, just call me Red for my hair color. And she always remembered that. It was also my dad's nickname, so it made me smile every time. This is the view from Barbara's window. Barbara unfortunately suffered from sundowning every day. So if you're not familiar with that, the sun comes down every night and it can cause some serious anxiety, confusion, right? So just general unrest in people. And I tried to console her. I tried to be a calming force for her, but nothing really seemed to work. She would just continue to pace around the apartment. Then I thought to introduce the idea of a time slip story. And time slip stories show an unfamiliar image and ask a series of beautiful questions to come up with a collaborative, imaginative story in that moment. She really, really took to this. It was great for her to have that creative outlet. And I found that if I timed it just right, she was able to lock in on it and avoid the uncomfortable symptoms of sundowning altogether, showing that having this creative outlet, being celebrated for something that she can contribute to, having that purpose was really, really crucial to her well being. And by the way, it made my job much easier as a caregiver as well. People saw Barbara as confused or anxious, but to me, she was a storyteller and she was my friend. Now, my journey then took me back to time slips, where I now am able to devise new programs that leverage creativity to help create moments of meaningful connection. And these meaningful connections are incredibly important because as we age, we tend to lose them or they begin to fade from what they were. And the result of that is social isolation having a serious health risk for us, the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This study put out by the US Surgeon General of our epidemic of loneliness and isolation linked social isolation to increasing risks of anxiety, depression, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and a lower quality of life. It also said that the leading cause of loneliness is the lack of perceived meaningful connections. Well, creativity can certainly provide opportunities for meaningful connections. So, I came up with a program back in 2020 called Telestories. And Telestories paired artists with underconnected elders to have discussions, use beautiful questions. This was building off of the idea of well check calls. Beautiful questions provided opportunities for them to connect in a much more efficient way than they would have otherwise. And I know actually that some of the artists still communicate with the people that they were paired with. The results using the UCLA loneliness scale were that both artists and elder participants felt a reduction in social isolation, as opposed to our control group, which was 40% more lonely, or many that had no change at all. Then we thought, well, we're onto something here. I want to make sure that we can make this a larger impact, reach more people. So we partnered with Meals on Wheels America and worked with 10 of their sites across the country. And we used this same training. I tweaked it a bit so that it could show them how to embed these techniques in even 30 seconds. And meal delivery drivers, as well as well check callers, started using this as a point of their care. The results 53% reported lower disconnectedness scores. Now that's pretty significant. To many, these people were viewed as lonely, but to the callers and the drivers, They were wise, wise people with a story to tell. Now, most recently, my journey has taken me to memory cafes. And memory cafes are welcome, joyful gatherings for both people experiencing memory loss and the people who care for them. In a memory cafe, you leave your diagnosis at the door and you're able to enter a space where you can just be yourself and be with people who understand what you're going through. They're incredibly joyful, and I encourage you to check out memorycafedirectory.com to find a cafe near you or learn how to start one. Because it's really my hope and my dream that memory cafes are available in every community. Now, outside of the cafe, people saw them as caregivers or people with dementia, right? But inside of the cafe, they were just people. I'm happy to share that my life has become significantly better because of people with dementia. And that's not a common narrative that you hear, I'm guessing, but it's true. And I urge you to consider the stigma and the assumptions you have of people with dementia and work past them. How do you do that? You could attend a memory cafe. You could also just be present with them. Ask a person with dementia a beautiful question. I promise you, it's not all that scary. The scary part is the idea of losing them before they're gone. And if I had succumbed to that idea, I would have lost 6 good years with my dad, important years. Yes, watching a loved one progress with dementia is challenging. And yes, it will require a lot from you. But now that I have navigated being a caregiver for both of my parents, and I now face the grief of being without them, I'd say that living without them is much harder. He was still my dad, and she is still your grandmother, and they're still your friends, right? And she is still your wife. Because without our memories, we are still human. Thank you.